Welcome to Pub Sports Radio's Ian Cameron's Football Frenzy. It's another edition of the show, Thursday, November 12th, Week 10 in the National Football League. It's unbelievable that we've passed the halfway mark of this season. The season is flying by. We're in mid-November. There is just so much going on a daily basis with these teams right now where, you've got COVID-19 situations popping up. It seems like every week now. The injury lists now, as we're into the, 9th, 10th game for these teams this season. Injuries are mounting. You've got to be able to stay on top of those, and it makes it you got to disseminate a lot of information, let's put it that way, when you're handicapping NFL football every week, college football as well. In fact, it might even be worse with college football, certainly from a COVID-19 standpoint, as we've just had a slew of games canceled already this week due to the pandemic. And obviously it makes things a little bit more tricky to handicap. I remember years ago, even just a couple of years ago, I'd be almost finalized on my NFL card midweek by Wednesday or Thursday. This week I'm still up in the air with a lot of stuff. I haven't really locked in many plays this week yet outside of the Thursday night game tonight, which we'll talk about in a second. And I think a couple of other plays where I saw the line was going to go up. The Buffalo, Arizona over, for instance. I bet 54 on that because I already saw that number shooting up. And sure enough, it's 56 now across the board. So, other than that, though, I haven't locked in a whole lot of plays this week in the NFL. And it's because you're worried that if you bet something now and then all of a sudden Friday, Saturday, Sunday rolls along and you're going to be caught with your pants down. And all of a sudden, whoops, COVID-19 situation, whoops, late injury, someone you thought might play isn't. So that's been the kind of season it's been. It's been very challenging, but nevertheless, it makes it even more rewarding when you win on an NFL week in a season like this. And this is a good week to be tuning into the show because for me, from an NFL standpoint, you see the numbers that I posted on Twitter. It's been a really good NFL season. It's 76-60, 56% overall. Profitable winning season so far for the subscription service that I have via email. And last week in the NFL in particular, 12-4, 75%. And yet when I mention that, I still have people that have the gall to say I'm lying, I'm fabricating stuff. So I said, you know what? Let's quiet these people. Let's post my actual email that I sent out to subscribers with the full NFL card, and it shows 12-4 last week. And it was a great week, and it's, I think, 27-10 the last 3 weeks for me in the NFL. It's been a great run. This is not normal for me in the NFL. It's not usually this good for a 3-week period for me. There's ups, there's downs, like it is for me in every sport. But there's no question the last 3 weeks it's been really good for me in the NFL, and it's been good overall in the season, profitable heading into Week 10. So hopefully we can give you some good opinions, good solid winning information here this week once again on the Ian Cameron's Football Frenzy show. Let's get into it. Let's start with the Week 10 slate. And of course, as we always do, starting with Thursday night football, it's going to be the Indianapolis Colts taking on the Tennessee Titans. We've got the Colts 1.5 point favorites here on the road, 48.5 the total in this game tonight. There's been just a ton of money coming in on Indianapolis here, and there's probably several reasons for it. I mean, there's a lot of people still not sold on Tennessee, particularly their defense. And it would be hard to argue. Prior to last week, the Titans on that side of the football have really not played great this season. They've at times been gashed against the run. Their secondary has given up big pass plays. They've lacked a consistent pass rush. Remember, this is a Titans team that was thinking that Jadeveon Clowney would be a big factor and someone to be the solution to maybe some of those lack of pass rush issues that they've had. And he really hasn't been that dominant impact player that they expected. And of course, he was injured last week. And it's funny, he was out last week due to injury. And yet it was probably one of the best games of the season for the Titans in terms of getting pressure on the quarterback. So that tells you all you need to know. He hasn't had that big imprint on this Titans defense this season that a lot of people thought he would. They bounced back after 2 straight losses with a win against the Chicago Bears last week. Don't be fooled by the final score. Tennessee controlled the game start to finish. Most of Chicago's points to make that final score respectable came later in the game. Tennessee sort of backing off, easing off the gas pedal a little bit, which sometimes teams do with a big lead. But that, in terms of the line of scrimmage battle, it was owned by Tennessee on both sides of the ball pretty much that entire game. Their offense was solid enough. Their defense was very good as well. Again, the best pass rush and the greatest amount of pressure I think I've seen from Tennessee's defense this season, which is a good sign because they've definitely had issues in that regard, getting consistent pressure on opposing quarterbacks this season. And I think that could bode well for them tonight because you look at this Indianapolis Colts team coming off a physical, tough loss against Baltimore over the weekend. Phillip Rivers has not necessarily been great this year. And, there's been certain situations where he has played well. Indoors, most of his good games have been in climate-controlled indoor dome environments. Most of his better performances have been against weaker defenses. And Tennessee's defense, for the most part this season, has been weak. So that's why you think to yourself, maybe Rivers can do well here. But the Titans defense, which Mike Vrabel kind of called them out after the way they played against Cincinnati, remember, for their second straight loss. And then they played much better last week against Chicago. And there are some issues for Indianapolis injury-wise on both sides of the football when you look at it. Jack Doyle, tight end, someone that Phillip Rivers has targeted a ton this year. He's going to miss this game. T.Y. Hilton's been upgraded. He's going to play, but he has had, a staggering lack of chemistry with Phillip Rivers. They've not been on the same page this season. He's not been that go-to dominant number one wide receiver that the Colts expect him to be. He's dropped some passes as well. It's not been a great year for him, so he's coming back from injury. It's certainly going to help because he demands defensive attention in this game from the Titans that he's going to be on the field. But he just hasn't been that awesome number one wide receiving option that the Colts were hoping for out of T.Y. Hilton this year. Really is that simple. And you look at the Indianapolis offensive line, which on paper looks great, but they've regressed a little bit this year. I don't think they've held up as well for Phillip Rivers. Now, keep in mind, they've had Andrew Luck and Jacoby Brissett, the last few seasons here in Indy. Guys that could at least get out of the pocket, scramble a bit, keep plays alive. Both of them could. Phillip Rivers can't do that, and I think it's making this Colts offensive line look worse as a result. So that's an issue, and we've got to bring up the fact that this is an older, aging quarterback playing on a short week. And if you've been following the pattern of results this season for the elder statesman quarterbacks in this league, playing on short weeks, on short rest, that being Brady and Breeze and Rivers, all of those older quarterbacks, they have all played some of their worst games and poorer games of the season, poorer performances of the season on that short rest. And that's definitely a concern for me as well. Now, the Titans have concerns. Their offensive line, with both tackles were injured last week, both starting tackles. Of course, Taylor Lewan, the left tackle, has been out for a while. One of the better left tackles in the NFL, no question. The right tackle got injured last week as well against Chicago. So there's issues on that O-line as well for Tennessee. But you got Derrick Henry still to offset that, not have to worry about always dropping back with Ryan Tannehill and forcing them maybe a compromised offensive line here to be able to worry about pass protection on every play. You've got the run game here to be solid. For me, I think this line move has gotten not just a little bit, quite a bit carried away. At this point with the Indianapolis Colts. It's a short week for them. It's on the road. I know Tennessee had the 2 losses in a row, but they lost by 3 to the still undefeated Pittsburgh Steelers. No shame in that. And they came all the way back and almost won the game. And then they had the predictable flat spot. It was their first loss of the season against Pittsburgh. It was a battle of undefeated teams at the time. And Tennessee was predictably, flat and just lethargic. The following week in the loss against Cincinnati. So I don't want to crucify the team for those 2 losses. And I think some people have that they bounced back last week against Chicago, dominated that game. They're at home here. Colts are traveling on a short week. Rivers, an older quarterback on a short week. That's not a situation I like. And when you start to look at the Indy defense, which has the better numbers, I think that's something that you have to keep in mind. The Colts defense, definitely numbers wise, production wise, has been a whole lot better than the Titans. But you start to look back at the schedule for the Colts, and they played Jacksonville. They played Kirk Cousins and the Vikings. They played the Jets. They played Nick Foles. They haven't played a ton of great offenses and quarterbacks, especially early in the season when they were racking up those wins. The two best offenses and quarterbacks you could say they played are the three. Cleveland lost that game straight up in ATS with Baker Mayfield. Baltimore, Lamar Jackson this past Sunday. They lost that game straight up in ATS. Cincinnati, Joe Burrow. Yeah, they were down 21-0 in that game, and they're very, very fortunate they were able to come all the way back against a bad Bengal defense to come back and just survive with a 31-27 win in that game. Failed to cover the number, I might add. So the Colts defense has good defensive numbers, but they've built up those great defensive credentials based on weak offenses, weaker quarterbacks. To me, Ryan Tannehill, borderline top 5 quarterback in the NFL. He might even be in the top 5 to a lot of people here in the NFL right now. To me, this line move's gotten carried away, and now I think the wrong team is favored in this game. And I like Frank Reich and the Colts, and I've backed them several times in the past, especially the last 2 years. Not so much this year because I'm not really enamored with Phillip Rivers. That's a big reason why I haven't bet the Colts much this season. Just don't want to back Phillip Rivers at this stage of his career very often. And I like Frank Reich, and he's a great coach, and he's certainly got the potential up here to devise a game plan on a short week against a divisional foe. Again, familiarity. You should know what to expect from Tennessee. That's always a worry when you're going against Indy. But to me, Tennessee at this price, you got to look their way, in my opinion. I think Tennessee wins this game. I would look to the Titans here, +1. From a totals perspective, 48.5 this total right now. Tennessee has been an over machine since Ryan Tannehill last year, middle of last year, took over the starting job. So they're still, to me, a team that I would either bet over or pass the game from a total standpoint. But I don't know if the Colts are going to be lighting up the scoreboard tonight against a Titan defense that played their best game, perhaps of the season last week. And Tennessee, you know what you're going to get from them. I think with especially some question marks in terms of depth at the tackle position with the injuries, you're going to see a heavy dose of Derrick Henry, a lot of clock churning tonight as well. So, yeah, Tennessee is still an over or pass team for me from a totals perspective, but this is not the matchup or situation I'm going to love the over tonight. So it's a pass on the total. It's just a lean to the over, but I do like Tennessee to get the win. Let's go to Sunday now and do the Sunday games on the Week 10 slate. We'll go in rotation order, but we'll also go in order of kickoff. So I know Cincinnati-Pittsburgh is at the top of the rotation, but that is a 4:25 p.m. Eastern late kickoff on Sunday, so we'll do that later in the show. We'll start with Washington and Detroit, 1 p.m. Eastern kickoff in the Motor City. This line is off the board in many books right now, again, because we're waiting on the confirmation of who's going to be in and who's going to be out for both of these teams. The Lions, 3.5 to 4-point home favorites, 46.5. The total in this game, based on where these current numbers are. Obviously, the biggest injury is the Kyle Allen injury at quarterback for the Washington football team. Just a gruesome injury. I mean, if you saw that live last week, the ankle injury he suffered, you almost have to turn your head from the television set. You know, it was difficult to stomach watching that. And you feel for any player in that predicament with suffering that kind of significant injury. And certainly the guy that's now going to be replacing Kyle Allen can certainly understand his frustration. Alex Smith, who, of course, had a leg injury 2 years ago that pretty much nearly ended his career, and life-threatening even for a period of time early with that injury. And he had to go through hell and back, essentially, Alex Smith, to get back on the field. And that's the human element of this that I really, really like. Alex Smith being able to get back on the field, and now he's going to be the starting quarterback here in this game against the Detroit Lions. It's great. You root for the guy. You hope he does well. Will he do well is the question. To say it was rough for Alex Smith last week would be an understatement. It was not very pretty for him, unfortunately. He did have a touchdown pass, but 3 interceptions, including the one at the end that pretty much put an end to the comeback bid that they had against the New York Giants last week. It was an unfortunate way to end that game as well for him. And again, but you got to remember this for him coming into this situation. He hasn't played football consistently week in and week out for 2 years. He's got an offensive line that is probably one of the bottom 5 offensive lines in the NFL, I would say, the Washington football team. Terry McLaurin and not a whole lot else at wide receiver on this football team. So it's not the great setup. The table's not set, around him. It's like you're going to the buffet. Oh, where's the veggie tray? Where's the tray of chicken? Where's the fish? Where is everything? The table's there. It hasn't been set. That's kind of like Alex Smith here with the Washington football team. He's coming back to an offense with a table that really hasn't been set properly for him. He's got an offensive line that's subpar. This is not a team loaded with great skill position talent. And as a result, then factor that with you haven't played, football for 2 years, week in and week out, you're going to have trouble. And that's exactly what happened for Alex Smith last week. There are issues with Washington. You talk about teams that find ways to lose on a weekly basis. Washington's done that this season. And if you're going to trust them here in this game, you got to have faith that maybe, they could find a way to close out a football game. It's been difficult. They obviously got off to the bad start last week and lost against the Giants. They also lost previously to the Giants. They've lost some games where they had an opportunity, but just hasn't been good enough in terms of end game execution for Washington. So it's been tough on them. We'll see if they can bounce back here against Detroit. But more than anything, my thought on this game is when I look at the Lions here, laying more than a field goal, and I have to ask myself, can this team be laying more than a field goal against anybody in the National Football League right now? I don't know if that's the case. I really don't know if that's the case with this Detroit Lions team. What I saw last week from them was embarrassing at times. I saw simple run support defense just gone, missing from the Detroit Lions. Like obvious downs and obvious plays from Minnesota where Dalvin Cook is running the football. You know it. You know he's getting the ball here on this down. You know he's getting the ball on this snap. And the Detroit Lions just looked like they had no clue what was coming, and they're giving up these 20, 30-yard runs to Dalvin Cook. They had a play in the game last week on defense against Minnesota where they have 10 guys on the field. They don't even have the right amount of guys on the field. When I'm seeing those kind of mental blunders, those kind of mental lapses, and we don't give a shit attitude, we're just going to 10 men on the field. It happened twice. It happened twice to the Lions last week on defense. It tells me the team's not got their head in it right now. It tells me the team is sort of, going through the motions, not really treating their craft with any sort of respect or professionalism or the focus that's required to win week in and week out in the National Football League. You don't have it when you're making those kind of mistakes, and you make those mistakes twice in the same game. You're going to tell me I'm interested in laying more than a field goal with a team like that? Can't stop anybody on defense. Matt Stafford, of course, has had the COVID issues recently, was cleared to play last week, was okay, but I think the lack of practice harmed him. With Kenny Golladay remaining a concern from an injury standpoint for the Detroit Lions, that's something you have to worry about as well for them going into this game against Washington. I'm going to assume here Stafford is going to play, but again, we don't know that for sure. Chase Daniel would take over. And Chase Daniel, if he's the quarterback for the Lions, look, he had a couple good starts years ago. But if you've seen Chase Daniel with the Bears or any start that he's made in a backup role recently, I'm talking like the last year or two, it's not been good. He hasn't played well in those situations at all. So if they don't have Stafford, it's going to be a big problem here. Red zone efficiency for the Lions again on offense last week was an issue. They they moved the ball against Minnesota at times, but they just couldn't finish drives enough, and that's going to be an issue here. And the offensive line for the Lions is mediocre at best. I think they're a little bit better than some other offensive lines in the NFL that are bottom tier, but they're not a great offensive line. And the best thing Washington has, maybe on their entire football team, is their defensive line, which should be able to pressure Stafford or Daniel, whoever's at quarterback here for the Detroit Lions, be able to get some pressure and be able to make some plays, maybe force some mistakes. We know at times fumble's an issue with Stafford when he gets hit. So to me, that's the key matchup here. I think Washington's defense can at least hold down Detroit a little bit because this offense is definitely, and Stafford's definitely not as comfortable or as productive if Kenny Golladay is not on the field. It relies more then on Marvin Jones and Amendola, who don't have that same breakaway, downfield threat that Golladay offers this Lions offense. It's going to come down to Alex Smith. Can he play even a little bit better than he did last week against the New York Giants? He came into the game off the bench. That's now twice he's done that. Remember the Rams game earlier this season for Washington. He came in off the bench, and it was a tough situation, and he struggled. Again, last week against the Giants, Kyle Allen gets injured. He comes in off the bench, struggles. At least this week, Alex Smith, he knows he's the starter. He can prepare for Detroit all week. He's going to get practice time. He's going to get opportunities with the first-team offense to get ready for this game. That's got to be a positive. That's got to put Alex Smith in a better position for success going into this game here Sunday afternoon against the Lions. So, yeah, I'm going to be looking at Washington. I can tell you that right now. It will be a play for me. It will be a bet for me. Just a question of how big will it be, and we'll have to determine that based on the Detroit situation, who's in and who's out for them. But you're going to ask me to lay 3.5, 4 with a team that had 10 men on the field on defense twice last week. That really, who are the last two wins for Detroit? I know Detroit perked up for a little bit there and had won 2 games in Jacksonville and Atlanta. Big deal. Since then, you lost to the Colts by 20 and you lost to Minnesota by 14. And this season, you're still a losing ATS team overall, 3-5 ATS this season for the Detroit Lions, which isn't very good by any stretch of the imagination. Washington's only 2-6 straight up, but they have covered 3 times this year. So for me, I like the Washington football team here, getting more than a field goal. And it's not so much a ringing endorsement for me of Washington. It's, to me, the Lions laying more than a field goal against any team in the NFL right now. That can't be a positive expectation wager, not at least in my mind. Houston, Cleveland. Cleveland 3-point favorites at home here, 49 the total. This total has gotten hammered down. 55 is where it opened, all the way to 49. And weather's a big factor. Very similar wind conditions currently in the forecast for Cleveland as the game that they played at home just a couple of weeks ago against the Las Vegas Raiders. And that game just easily stayed under the total. Those crosswinds, at that stadium where the Browns play, that's concerning, if you're going to like the over in this game. And I think that is what bettors are looking at here. Good news for Cleveland is they're off a bye. That's good news. They could have Nick Chubb back at running back. Tight end Austin Hooper could be back. Wyatt Teller, one of their starting O-linemen, could also be back. But the question remains here, are we going to end up seeing Baker Mayfield at quarterback here for the Cleveland Browns? He is another player that's been battling COVID-19 issues for the Cleveland Browns. You would expect that here. I think that he's on target to play here on Sunday in this game. But again, the bye week has at least gotten Cleveland a little bit healthier going into this game. Specifically, the chance to have Nick Chubb back would be great. Although Kareem Hunt did pretty good in his filling in for him at the running back spot. But Nick Chubb, before he got injured, he was really, really getting it done here for this Cleveland Browns team in terms of being able to run the football effectively. So having him back is certainly something that is going to make Cleveland fans very excited going into this game against the Houston Texans. So we know Odell Beckham Jr. is not coming back this year. But again, if you get Chubb and you get Hooper back, they should be able to take advantage of Houston's defense, which is terrible, is absolutely terrible. And that's why last week, I know people were just thinking I was nuts. And yeah, I did need a backdoor touchdown. Full disclosure. All right, I needed some luck on my side with Jacksonville plus the 7 last week against Houston. But I know when I was doing the NFL Sunday show right here on the Pub Sports Radio YouTube channel, the closing time show, me, Connor Mack, and Ski Profit. Make sure, by the way, you're checking out that show this Sunday. We're back at noon Eastern. And I mentioned I like Jacksonville and I like Jake Luton in his first start with the Jaguars. that raised a few eyebrows in the chat. And I know Ski and Connor were like, are you crazy, Ian? Or have you completely lost it? You're going to take Jacksonville here, a Jacksonville team that have been a disaster from an ATS and straight up perspective several games in a row. But they got it done. And yeah, I needed a backdoor touchdown late from Luton and the Jaguars to get inside the number. But the main premise of me betting the Jaguars last week was Houston laying points with a Civ defense on the road. Couldn't do it. In fact, they were winless on the road, the Houston Texans, going into last week against Jacksonville. That was their first road win of the season. And it was by the skin of their teeth against probably the second worst team in the NFL. There's only one team that is worse in the NFL than the Jacksonville Jaguars right now. And that, of course, is the New York Jets, Jets. That's it. And Houston was still life or death to win that game and really never pulled away from Jacksonville. And it's because the defense can't stop anybody. They've got one of the worst run defenses in the National Football League. That really hasn't changed from week to week. Now, I know and that to me is one of the grave concerns about the possibility of Nick Chubb returning in this game for the Cleveland Browns, is that he might be able to feast on one of the worst run defenses in the NFL should he return to action and play in this game. And even if he doesn't, that means Kareem Hunt's going to have a big game last week. So, it's going to be a situation where the running backs are definitely, and Cleveland is a team that would like to run the football a lot. They don't want to put the game in the hands and the arm of Baker Mayfield consistently. They want that ground game to be working. They want that ground game to be a focal point of the offense here. So to me, it's going to be a run-heavy offense, and it's probably going to be a very productive run game for the Cleveland Browns against this Houston defense, regardless of whether Chubb is back here in this game. Their secondary as well is also very, very suspect. Jake Luton sliced them for a big couple of pass plays last week, including the touchdown very early in that game. It's definitely Houston's secondary is not quite as bad as the run defense, but it's still pretty bad. They were down a couple of cornerbacks. Bradley Roby is the guy they missed. Bradley Roby, we'll have to see if he's out again. Let me see if I can get an update right now on that. But they didn't have him on the field last week, and if he doesn't return this week, that's going to be an issue for this defense, because they've already had injuries in the secondary this year with Garyon Conley and Vernon Hargraves, and there's been multiple cluster injuries there, and Bradley Roby is one of the best they've got in a secondary that's not really all that special to begin with. So he doesn't play again. It's going to be probably some issues here for the Houston Texans, no question about that. Houston does have an offense, though, and Deshaun Watson, is the reason that Houston is able to have the chance they have to win any games this year. It's been because of the offense. David Johnson, by the way, got injured last week for the Houston Texans. We'll have to wait and see if he goes, but David Johnson to me has not had that impact that Houston thought. But Bill O'Brien, let's get David Johnson. Let's trade away DeAndre Hopkins. That's not necessarily working out, but I think a lot of people kind of expected that to be the case. Cleveland's secondary continues to just be a disaster, really. Now, the problem is, Houston, not a great running team. They haven't been able to run the football great. A lot of their offense comes from Deshaun Watson through the air. He's still got a lot of weapons to work with here. You've still got injuries in the secondary for the Cleveland Browns, Greedy Williams and Grant Delpit, among others. The Browns can get pressure. That's the strength of their defense, is the defensive front. Houston's offensive line at times has been a little bit shaky, but at least with Watson, he's got some mobility to get away from Myles Garrett and the like, trying to rush the quarterback here in this game. It's really, really difficult because even though Cleveland's off a bye week here, they've got issues in the secondary. How good is Baker Mayfield going to be? There's question marks here for Cleveland here in this game. They're getting the money, and I kind of understand why that is, but I don't love Cleveland in this necessarily this week. I don't think I would take Houston at this number. And from a totals perspective, if the wind is not an issue, I'd like the over. I think there'd be a good chance for points on both sides here in this game. But, I remember that Vegas Cleveland game, and I saw that total just take a huge dive downward, and the wind was an issue. And it looks like the wind is going to be very, very similar wind forecast for Sunday rather this week in Cleveland, and the game ended up staying way under the total. So for me, it's a slight lean to Cleveland, as long as you can get -3, which you still can at many places. But it's not a game I expect to be on the card. Houston might actually be a good teaser. You can tease them up above a touchdown. I don't know if Cleveland's going to blow out the Houston Texans, because Deshaun Watson and the offense continues to be, and again, can always get a late score to get you inside a teaser number, especially if you can get Houston up to +9 on a 6-point teaser. That would make some sense to me as well. Jacksonville, Green Bay, next game on the card. Green Bay, 13-point favorites at home at Lambeau, 50 the total. Yeah, I cashed with Jacksonville last week. It doesn't necessarily mean I'm rushing to bet them again here against the Green Bay Packers this week. But Jake Luton, I want to start with him. He was solid, I thought, last week for the Jacksonville Jaguars. And Doug Marrone, who knows he's probably done as a head coach after this season, he's not going to be coming back. He's going to be out on his keister. He figured, team's not going anywhere. Let's roll the dice. And it's not like Gardner Minshew was the problem with Jacksonville this season. But he didn't play as well, Gardner Minshew, when he started earlier this season as he's done last year and in years past. He really hasn't. And I think that's a big reason why we have seen Doug Marrone make that change and go with Jake Luton out of Oregon State. And, he's very good last week. Now, again, the Texans had some injuries on defense. There was no pressure on Luton. That's going to be the concern going into this game. Green Bay, all of a sudden, the pass rush the last couple games, it's picked up for this Packers defense, and he will face more pressure. And there was one time when Luton really had someone in his face last week, and he threw a bad interception. It was not a decision you should have made. It's not a throw he should have made. And he's probably going to be forced into more situations like that against Green Bay's defense, particularly Green Bay's pass rush, than he was last week against the Houston Texans. So that's going to be the test for Luton. Plus, it's on the road. Not that it matters, because, again, the lack of fans or minimal fans in most stadiums, so it's not the big of a deal. But still, you got to be able to do it against a better team, and you got to be able to do it away from home. But I still think there's hope for this Jacksonville offense to be somewhat decent. DJ Chark had a really good game downfield in the receiving game last week for the Jacksonville Jaguars. James Robinson's been solid at times running the football for this Jaguars team. So, there is hope for this team on offense a little bit, no question. But going to be asking a lot here against Green Bay, because, how does Aaron Rodgers not slice the Jacksonville defense? Jacksonville's defense has been terrible all year. They weren't very good again last week against Houston, even though Jake Luton and the offense, I thought, played well. Most drives for Houston, when they weren't shooting themselves in the foot with penalties, they were able to move the football pretty successfully all game long against that Jaguars defense. That remains a concern for this team, is how many stops are they going to get facing Aaron Rodgers and company here in this game? You look at recent results here for Green Bay. They have started to get the offense going. It was up and down the field for them against San Francisco last Thursday night in that 34-17 win against a banged-up, beleaguered San Francisco team. They had the loss against Minnesota, where they didn't play as well that week. But then before that, they piled up 35 points on Houston. So this is a Green Bay offense. It's going to be very difficult, I think, for the Jaguars to contain them. I do lean to the full game over still, but again, we've got potential wind in the forecast here at Lambeau. We'll see if this total drops further. I don't know if I'll bet the over at 50. I think if it drops a little bit further, I'll get interested, because I don't think Green Bay's shutting out Luton and the Jaguars. I do think the Jaguars will do put up some points on offense. I've got this thought that this could be like a 35-17 type of score in favor of Green Bay. I don't want the Jacksonville side this week like I did last week. That was just as much a fate of Houston, as it was a pro-Jacksonville opinion for me last week. So maybe you look full game over. Maybe you look Green Bay team total over as well. If you just want to isolate Rodgers against that very, very poor Jaguar defense, then maybe the Aaron Rodgers team, or not Aaron Rodgers, the Green Bay Packers team total over makes sense. But like I said, I cashed with Jacksonville last week. Very happy about it. But that doesn't mean I just bet Jacksonville now every week moving forward. It was the right matchup. It was the right opponent. It was a winless Houston team laying a touchdown on the road where they hadn't, or a winless Houston winless on the road laying a touchdown in that game last week. It was just, to me, Houston can't be laying a touchdown on the road, not even against Jacksonville. And, it turned out that was the case. But I do think Jacksonville is going to be up against it because I just don't know if the defense has the pass rush. They certainly can't stop the run. So you could see Aaron Jones being a focal point of this Packer offense on Sunday and having a good day as well. And again, when you've got Devontae Adams, just, it doesn't matter how many cornerbacks and defensive backs you stick on him. He's still making plays every single week for this team. And look out now, Marquez Valdez-Scantling, who has been a major disappointment for Green Bay this year. He got going against San Francisco. What did he have? 2 touchdowns, several big plays downfield for Rodgers. If he can be a consistent and reliable second option at wide receiver for Aaron Rodgers, it's going to make Green Bay even more difficult offensively to defend. So seeing a Marquez Valdez-Scantling sighting last week in the victory against San Francisco, that was a welcome sight if you're a Packer fan. One of our personalities here on the Pub Sports Radio YouTube channel, Razor Sharp, welcome in. Rodgers going to go for 5+ touchdowns against this defense. I'm not saying it will happen, but it's possible. Philadelphia, New York Giants. Man, is it fun talking about the NFC least? Not. But it's a game. It's got a point spread. We got to talk about it. Philadelphia -3 on the road, 3.5. In some other spots, 44.5 the total. How about the total being bumped up 41 to 44.5? Maybe there's a reason for that. The Giants offense got going a little bit last Monday night against Tampa Bay. Of course, they still found a way to lose the game in extremely, extremely frustrating fashion, which has happened a lot to the New York Giants this year. But you look at some of these losses: 2-point loss to Tampa, a 1-point loss to this Philadelphia Eagles team in Philadelphia on Thursday Night Football a few weeks ago, a 3-point loss to Dallas, an 8-point loss to the Rams, a 4-point loss to Chicago. They've been in a lot of games, and it's not always an easy team to bet against when laying points with the favorite. And they have had a good point spread record. For as bad as the Giants have been straight up wise, 2-7, they're 6-3 against the number this year, which tells you they've been competitive, and they've actually outperformed betting market expectations so far this season. Philadelphia Eagles, though, here's the issue with the Giants. They've been really good as dogs. And again, they are home underdogs of a field goal or 3.5 in some spots here. This is not a great Giants spot. It can't be. You put all your heart and guts and soul and everything into the Monday night game last week against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And they played a really good game, 25-23. Actually, that was 2 weeks ago. I'm getting my schedule mixed up here. Washington last week, they played 23-20, but again, another close game, in division game, a game where, you look at the stats and you see, they should have controlled that game, but they let Washington back into the game, and Washington nearly came all the way back and won last week against the New York Giants. We'll see how they fare here now against the Philadelphia Eagles. But Philadelphia, the concern with betting against them here is they're getting healthier. They're starting to get some of their injured parts back, and that could mean. And when Philadelphia starts getting some of these players back, they've got the chance, I think, to easily to win this division, because I think when fully healthy, they're still probably the best team in this division. They're better than Washington, better than New York, better than Dallas. And they're starting to get some of their injured parts back, and they're starting to play better football. They controlled Dallas 23-9 last week. They beat the Giants 2 weeks ago. The Baltimore game, 30-28 against a good Ravens team. They were right in that game, battled the Ravens to the end. Against Pittsburgh, they held their own, lost by 9, and that is when this Eagles team was still injury-riddled, dealing with just an absolute ton of injuries, and now starting to get some key players back. This Philadelphia injury report finally took a while, but finally it's starting to look a little bit better. Help is on the way. Light is at the end of the tunnel. for the infirmary here of the Philadelphia Eagles from an injury standpoint. But it's good to see because Jason Peters looks like he's going to be back at left tackle. Jalen Reagor is the wide receiver who they drafted. It looks like he's going to be back as well here for the Philadelphia Eagles, which is a good sign for them. Zach Ertz is still going to be out. Hell, Lane Johnson, and we know how significant he is. He might return as well for the Eagles in this game, but they are definitely starting to get some injured parts back, which is good to see. And, it definitely is going to help this team moving forward. This number is just right now in a very good spot, but to me, with Philadelphia getting healthier, Giants just finding ways to just snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. It's happening to them every single week, it seems. Now, last week they had the big lead, but still almost gave it away. They almost snatched defeat from the jaws of victory again last week. I would lean slightly to Philadelphia here. I don't love it, but I would lean Eagles here, -3, -3.5 on the road. I know the Giants have a great underdog record this year, but in a lot of these games, they've been getting more than, 3.5 points. They've been catching, 6 points, 7 points. They've been a double-digit dog at times. They're not getting as many points here in this game. So that's why, to me, there might be enough wiggle room for the Eagles to just push across a win and cover, laying this short of a number here. Tampa Bay, Carolina. Tampa Bay, 5.5, 6-point road favorites, 50.5 the total. This number's been played up here. Yeah, I could see why. With the over money. This is a bounce back game, you would think, for Brady and the Bucs. I'm not throwing Tampa Bay in the garbage because they got destroyed by New Orleans. It was one of those games. It was an awful game. The defensive front for New Orleans, give them credit. They owned the line of scrimmage last week against the Bucs. Brady was under duress. It was really one of the best performances this season from that Saints defense. The secondary, Marshawn Lattimore, who struggled this year, boy, he had his best game of the season by far last week. He pretty much put Mike Evans on lockdown throughout that entire game. And it was just a dominant performance by the New Orleans Saints. And you would think this is a good bounce back situation here. Look, as much as I like Carolina, and I've mentioned the numbers with Teddy Bridgewater as an underdog, and how he's been great in that role. And Carolina, in theory, from a betting concepts standpoint, Carolina, I would rather bet them as underdogs than favorites. That's been the way it's been this year. Of course, last week against Kansas City, double-digit underdogs in that game. They get the wire-to-wire point spread cover last week against Kansas City, but a tough loss. You battled the Chiefs, the defending Super Bowl champions, in Arrowhead, down to the wire, and you fall just short, 33-31. You worry now about, they fall flat this week. Christian McCaffrey comes back. He plays great. He was a big part of why Carolina offensively got things going last week, and now he's hurt again. So, and now you're starting to get concerned because McCaffrey now is starting to develop these recurring injuries, and you're really starting to get concerned that he's just not a guy that may be capable of staying healthy for a long period of time. You got to definitely be worried about that if you're a Carolina Panther fan, that, just these injuries keep on happening here for Christian McCaffrey. But in this spot, in this situation, as much as I've looked to back Carolina, and I was on the Panthers last week, I just thought it was a home run spot, double digits, big amount of points. Kansas City playing a non-conference game and an NFC opponent, just do enough to win the game, and that's exactly what the Chiefs did. I was on Carolina last week. I don't know if I'm going to be on Carolina here, though. I'm worried Tampa Bay, full focus. The defense got shredded. We know there's a better defense than they showed last week. They've got a good defensive front led by Levante David and company. They're going to really want to make amends here after that loss to the New Orleans Saints. And, Carolina, for as solid as they've been at times this year, step up in class games in terms of being able to actually win those games, that just hasn't happened here for the Carolina Panthers. That's my issue here with them going into this game. So the Tampa Bay's taking money. I can see why. I think now with the current number, 5.5, 6, I'm not as enamored with taking the Bucs, but I understand why at 4.5 people were betting that side. And I do agree with this line move up in the total because, again, the Carolina defense is still very shaky. We saw that last week. Atlanta moved the ball against them as well the week before against the Falcons. Panthers couldn't stop them on the Thursday night game. Saints carved up the Carolina defense. Carolina defense has really had trouble with a pass rush, and the secondary's been really bad all season long as well. That could be issues when you're trying to match up with Evans, and now you're trying to match up with Godwin. And look, they were out of sync last week, the Tampa offense, but now you're going to get that full week of practice with Brown, with Evans, with Godwin, Scotty Miller, Gronk, who had a bad, like everybody. It was just a collective flop. The offensive line was terrible. Everybody was bad on the Buccaneers offense last week. They're going to have the practice focus. They're going to have the motivation. And on the other side, they got a Carolina defense that's very, very suspect, to say the least. So I lean Bucs, and I lean over the total in that one with Tampa and Carolina. All right, the rest of the games, they're all 4 o'clock starts, the late window of games on Sunday. We'll start with Denver, Las Vegas. We've got the Raiders at beautiful Alliant Stadium, 4.5, 5-point favorites, 50.5 the total in this game. Denver doesn't have a defense right now. They don't. They were playing without their 2 starting cornerbacks last week against the Atlanta Falcons, and the Falcons pretty much did whatever they wanted to do offensively against that Denver defense. The Denver defense was just ill-equipped to deal with Atlanta's passing game last week, and we saw that pretty much on full display. The Las Vegas offense, really, they should have a lot of success here. I mean, Bryce Callahan, AJ Boye, and from what I've read, not a sure thing that Denver gets either of those guys back on the field this week here, AJ Boye or Bryce Callahan. So, yeah, Callahan with the questionable concussion issues for Boye, questionable at best. We haven't had any sort of firm confirmation one way or another if they return or not. And if they don't return here, it's going to be another tough day, I think, for their defense because Derek Carr's got weapons, and Derek Carr's throwing the football well. It's time we start giving a little love to Derek Carr. He's playing well most weeks here. Tough weather environment against Cleveland 2 weeks ago, 16-6. He couldn't really do a whole lot throwing the football with the wind the way it was in that game, but he did enough, got them the win. The Chargers last week, the offense was in rhythm, in sync. He's making good plays, and Derek Carr has actually made a point of it to start running the football a lot more. You're starting to see him scramble a lot more than he did earlier in the season and even earlier in his career, and he's having a lot of success for that with that, and he did last week. Couple of first downs he got running the football against the Chargers last week. Now, they had to hang on. They had to get an incomplete ruling at the end of the game, which was the right call, by the way, to hang on and beat the Chargers. But the Raiders' offense is in good form, and they're facing a very depleted defense. We know they've lacked a pass rush as well. I mean, the Von Miller's been out all year. Even Bradley Chubb's had some issues with, being 100% healthy throughout the course of the season, and they're just not generating as much pressure on opposing quarterbacks this year, Denver. And if you're not going to pressure Carr, he can make plays to Hunter Renfrow and to Nelson Aguilar and Henry Ruggs in this receiving corps. What's amazing about the Raiders is Henry Ruggs really hasn't even gotten it fully going yet, the first-round pick out of Alabama. He's had some games where he's been, not great, and he's dropped some passes. Wait till he gets, more consistent, becomes an even bigger part of the offense to go with Aguilar and Renfrow and to go with Jacobs running the football. There's a lot to like about the Raiders offense. There's not so much to like about their defense, though. That's the one thing that worries me. I know a lot of people in Las Vegas, obviously, and I'm sure you guys do as well in the chat, and a lot of people that are Raiders fans, and they're getting excited. Why not? You should be excited. Your team's showing a little promise here, a little bit of hope, which is good to see. You're 5-3 on the season. You feel like you got a chance to make the playoffs. And you're getting excited. You're thinking, maybe we can get in the playoffs. Maybe we can do some damage. They will not do any damage unless the defense gets somewhat better. And they are not there yet in terms of that side of the football. They are not. The secondary can get shredded, get carved up. Justin Herbert really did carve them up last week against this Raiders defense. That's the unit that is suspect here on this Raiders team right now, the defensive side of the football. I really want to look over the total because you've got a Las Vegas team that have been over machines this year. You look at the numbers for Vegas, 6-1-1 to the over this season. The one under that they played this year, the one and only game for the Las Vegas Raiders that stayed under the total was that wind game against Cleveland. And again, mostly every game with two football teams playing in that kind of heavy wind environment where the wind's just whipping around the stadium, and it's a crosswind as well, which makes it even more difficult to throw the football deep and throw it accurately on a consistent basis. That's the only game for the Las Vegas Raiders that has stayed under the total. Other than that, they've had 6 overs and 1 push from a total standpoint in their other games this season. So to me, this has over written all over it. I grabbed the Denver-Atlanta over late. I was concerned whether Denver offensively would do enough to get that game over the total, but they did against Atlanta's defense. And Drew Lock's got issues. Drew Lock's not played great this year, but I find that when Denver gets behind in these games in the second half, that's when he gets going. That's when Drew Lock piles up the yards, moves the chains, scores points, puts touchdown drives together. It's usually when the game is already out of reach. And we saw that from Drew Lock and the Broncos last week against Atlanta. So I do think Denver can do enough offensively here against the Raiders' suspect defense to be able to score points. Obviously they've got question marks in their receiving core in terms of injuries with Spencer and obviously Cortland Sutton's been out for most of the season, but Tim Patrick questionable, Jerry Jeudy questionable. So that there's concerns there. Noah Fant, the tight end as well, all battling injuries. It's all valid points as to why you'd maybe hesitate a little on the over here. But to me, that would still be the way to go. And from a side perspective, I don't want Denver here. But we're talking 4.5 and 5 now that we're laying here with the Las Vegas Raiders, and their defense is still not great. And I don't love laying. My rule in the NFL is what I've said with Seattle already a few times this season, and I'll say it with the Raiders. Laying more than a field goal with a defense that I don't trust is just not something generally that I'm going to do. Yeah, even for me here with against the Denver Broncos with this Las Vegas Raiders team. I just don't trust their defense enough. The lean is certainly to Las Vegas. I don't want Denver right now. No way. But their defense is, again, it's questionable and it's shaky enough, the Raiders on that side of the ball, that I don't love laying the 4.5, 5 with them here in this spot. But I do think this over is worth a look here, 50.5. I haven't bet it yet, but definitely looking in that direction. Buffalo and Arizona. We've got the Cardinals, 2-point home favorites in the desert, 56 the total. This total has gone up 7 points. If you got the really early opening total on this game, it was 49. I think when it became available at most sports books, the total was 51, 52 in most spots. And since then, it's gone up even further. It's now 56, the widely available number with this total. It's been hammered up, and I already bet it early in the week because I knew it could only go up. Who's stopping who in this game? There are cluster injuries on defense with both of these teams, particularly in the secondary. Arizona's defense last week against Miami, that secondary was ravaged, completely and utterly ravaged from an injury perspective last week. Multiple key cog starters in that secondary that didn't suit up for the Cardinals last week against the Miami Dolphins. And look at what we've got this week. Budda Baker, one of the top safeties in the NFL, groin injury, questionable. But the bigger issues, Chandler Jones has been out for weeks. Since he's been out, the pass rush hasn't consistently been there for Arizona. Dre Kirkpatrick in that secondary missed the last game with that thigh injury against Miami. He may not be back this week. Kevin Peterson, concussion. He may not play in this game either for the Arizona Cardinals. So you've got cluster injuries in the secondary. And you got Josh Allen and a very good explosive Bills offense coming to town. That's not going to be easy. I mean, Tua and the Dolphins went up and down the field against this Arizona defense, and it's because of the injuries they're dealing with right now. And I don't know if they're going to get much artillery back on that side of the ball for this game. So to me, this is a game where we can expect another good offensive showing, I think, for the Bills. However, one of the disappointments this season in all of football in terms of one particular position group or one unit in terms of their play last year to this year in terms of a downgrade, biggest disappointments for me is the defense of the Buffalo Bills. I mean, this has been a great defense the last couple of years, and they've not played anywhere near that level going in so far this season. That's a big-time issue. And you look at last week against Seattle, it took a while for the Seahawks to get going, but once they did, Buffalo had trouble stopping them here in this game. But, Josh Allen, And the Bills offense, I think they righted the ship last week. 44 points in that 44-34 win against Seattle. Red zone issues and turnovers were really a problem for Allen and the Bills, but they corrected a lot of those mistakes. They were outstanding in the red zone. Every time they got it close, they capitalized, they punched in touchdowns, and with a lack of pass rush and a cluster injury situation in the secondary for Arizona, they should have success. But you could say the same thing about Arizona's offense here. The Bills, Tre'Davious White's a great cornerback, but we're starting to see him get abused a little bit. He's a little bit undersized. Bigger receivers have had issues with him. It fits him up against DeAndre Hopkins here. It's a mismatch for DeAndre Hopkins. He's got a huge size advantage over Tre'Davious White. Tre'Davious White is a smart, intellectual, instinctive cornerback. He's got great instincts, great football IQ, knows how to be in the right position. But sometimes you can't defy gravity. Sometimes you just can't define your stature. And going into this game, he's going to be at a significant disadvantage physically against DeAndre Hopkins. He's as tough as all get out, and he's a good cornerback, Tre'Davious White. Don't get me wrong, but if he's going to be, and you would assume he's going to be the guy, number one versus number one, DB versus wide receiver, that's a huge advantage and mismatch in favor of the much taller and bigger DeAndre Hopkins. So that to me is a big issue, I think, for Buffalo defensively here. Matt Milano's a key linebacker for them. Great in terms of coverage over the middle of the field. Knows when to come up, stuff the run, knows when to drop back in coverage. He's also one of those guys you would rely on, to spy a mobile quarterback. And we know Kyler Murray, as mobile as it gets, he has no qualms whatsoever about running the football, keeping it himself. This is a very, very good Arizona offense. They also went up and down the field against Miami last week. And if not for a dumb decision by Cliff Kingsbury, look, Miami hasn't stopped our offense all day. But late in the game, we're going to kick this 49-yard field goal, and Zane Gonzalez leaves it short. I couldn't believe it. You're dominating this team, and your offense is having the best of it against Miami's defense. I know you need a field goal to tie the game late, but go for the win. I mean, go for at least the first down and keep the drive going, because they haven't been able to stop you all day. I was mesmerized and stunned, flabbergasted by that decision late in the game by Cliff Kingsbury, which ended up being the wrong one as Arizona loses that game. But to me, this is a question of who's going to stop who. And I don't know if either team's going to stop anybody, particularly with injury situations on both teams. Milano for the Bills, the key linebacker, one of their top defensive players all together on that defense. And of course, I mentioned the cluster injuries in the secondary for Arizona. So to me, this has shootout written all over it. It's gone up to 56. But I still don't want an under at any number in this game, because 31-28, 35-31 even is a final score that I could see taking place and occurring in this game. So for me, it's over all the way. I think from a side perspective, I would actually lean to the Arizona side here at home, because for the Bills, big win against New England a couple weeks ago, big win against one of the top teams and quarterbacks in the NFL, beating Seattle last week. But now you're going on the road facing another out-of-conference team, Arizona. It just feels, and Arizona, chomping at the bit now after the loss to Miami last week. To me, from a spot and scheduling perspective, it's a good one for Arizona. If they weren't so banged up on defense, I think I would take Arizona, but I lean that way. I think the total is my stronger opinion, though. I like this game to be a shootout. And again, indoors in the desert there, weather won't be an issue there. LA Chargers, Miami Dolphins. We've got Miami, 2.5 point favorites at home, 48 the total. The red hot Miami Dolphins. I mean, there's a lot to like, no question. And I don't want to rain on the Dolphins parade. They've been a massive surprise this year. They have played outstanding football for the most part in recent weeks. You got to like the direction. Brian Flores has coached this team very well as well. This season and going into this game. You've got to like what you're seeing, no question, from Miami. Tua didn't do much against the Rams a couple weeks ago. He relied on fumble return touchdowns, special teams touchdowns. That's what really gave him the support in that game against the Rams. Last week, he had the chance to show, can I do it myself? Can I get our offense going? And he did that. Again, as I just mentioned a minute ago, that was a banged up, beleaguered Arizona defense he was up against, but you still have to give Tua some sort of credit. He showed his mobility. He showed a much greater desire and willingness to run with the football last week. And the fact he was able to do it successfully and not get hurt, it's a sign that maybe he's getting healthier and healthier coming back from that significant injury by the week, and which is definitely obviously a very good sign for the Miami Dolphins moving forward. But yeah, I mean, their offense, he struggled in his debut, but the Rams defense was excellent. He should be able to play well here because to me, for Tua, he is just after 2 games, he faced a really good defense in the Rams and struggled. He faced a injury-riddled, not quite as good defense in Arizona, and he played well. So you have to evaluate. I think that's the way you have to handicap Tua Tagovailoa and the Miami offense moving forward. Are they playing an elite defense? Are they playing a good defense? Are they playing a bad defense? Right now, the Chargers are a bad defense. And that's been one of the most shocking and disappointing parts about the disappointing season the LA Chargers have had. Their defense hasn't been anywhere close to as good. Not even close, this Chargers defense. And the numbers bear that out as well. It has been a rough go of it for this team to consistently be able to get stops on opposing defenses. They're giving up just a chunk yardage on the ground, which is definitely something that you worry about. Look at these Chargers defensive numbers here. They're giving up 5 yards per carry on the ground. 120 rushing yards per game at nearly 5 yards per carry. They're giving up 240 yards through the air. They're also dealing with some injuries right now, the Chargers. The secondary's been absolutely ravaged by injury. And even the guys they've got in that secondary right now have disappointed at times. So to me, and over the middle, tight ends have had big games against this Chargers defense. The Mike Gesicki is a guy that stands out, could have a big game. Player props, you look at him. I think the ability to not stop the run, or the inability, I should say, to stop the run for the LA Chargers, that's going to hurt them in this game as well. Unfortunately, Myles Gaskin being on IR kind of takes away from the Dolphins running game a bit. I don't know if I like Matt Breida or Jordan Howard or some of the other backup options that the Dolphins have at running back with Myles Gaskin out. But in theory, if Miami wants to attempt to run the football, they should be able to have success doing so going into this game here against the LA Chargers. The Chargers on the flip side, though, look, I mean, at some point, you're sick and tired of fighting and scrapping and clawing and battling and competing and, just being right in every single game and then pissing it away late and finding a way to lose. And the LA Chargers have been the poster child of team finding a way to lose this season. And it happened again last week against the Las Vegas Raiders. You know what's kind of funny? And it's not funny if you're a Chargers fan, but it's funny to everybody else, including me. They couldn't hold on to a lead. They had a double-digit lead in several games and lost this year, including the Denver game a couple weeks ago. Yesterday, actually trailed by double digits, and it actually looked like they were coming back in the fourth quarter and maybe about to win that game, and maybe for a change be on the right side of a comeback/collapse. And yet still, they end up losing in heartbreak fashion. And that's been the way it's been for the LA Chargers this year. I feel real bad for Justin Herbert because the team's win-loss record and the fact that they're finding ways to lose is this black cloud that is reigning over what's been a pretty good season for him at quarterback for the Chargers. I think he's played very well for the most part. He's made some few mistakes, sure, but every rookie quarterback is going to do that at some point. But Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, Jalen Guyton, and Hunter Henry have been good options in the passing game for the Chargers. Even without Austin Eckler, Justin Jackson and Joshua Kelly have at times given them a decent ground attack. I don't know what to make of the Miami defense because for a few weeks there, it was starting to look like, wow, this Miami defense is playing a lot better. But then you look back on it. Yeah, you played the 49ers with Jimmy Garoppolo not 100%. You played the Jets, miserable team. You played the Rams, in Miami, and we know Jared Goff on the road is not usually as good. Then you played finally a really good offensive attack last week in Kyler Murray, and you got absolutely bombed in that game. And I should point out the Rams game, it's going to look points-wise, you held the Rams to 17. The Rams had 500 yards or close to it in total offense against the Dolphins in that game, but they just couldn't hang on to the football and finish those drives with points. But they did move the ball against Miami. They just didn't have enough production to go with it. I have been riding the LA Chargers over the total every week for the last few weeks. I've been on every recent Chargers game over the total. In fact, 2 weeks in a row on the Sunday closing time show, Chargers overs have been my best bet on the show. We had the Chargers Denver game over as my best bet on the Sunday closing time show on this channel 2 weeks ago. Had it again last week with the Raiders Chargers game over the total as a best bet. So you guys know what I'm doing here, right? Yeah, we're going over the total here, Chargers and Dolphins. Two of the young future quarterbacks going toe-to-toe. A Chargers defense has fallen off a cliff. And the Miami defense, to me, not as good as the recent wins would show. I would lean to the over. There's no way I'm going against Miami here. 2.5 point home favorites, and they found ways to win, and the Chargers have consistently found ways to lose. But Miami's been an underdog in virtually every situation lately. You look at Miami during this run that they've put together. Actually all season they've been favored once, and that was against the Jets. That's it. But every other game they've been an underdog. Now they're favored. This is a different point spread roll. We'll see if they can handle it here against the LA Chargers. I think there's been a big adjustment made to Miami. I don't know if there's great value this week on the Dolphins, but when you look at these two teams, there's one team that's found a way to win some games. That's Miami. And there's one team that's consistently found ways to lose games. That's the LA Chargers. So even though I don't love the value on Miami, it's still less than a field goal. I would only lay it with the home favorite Miami here in this game, but I definitely like the over more than the side with Chargers Dolphins. All right, let's keep it going. Cincinnati, Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh 7.5, 8-point home favorites, 47.5 the total. Cincinnati's taken all the money throughout the week. 10 was the open with the Steelers as home chalk. Now they're 7.5, and it's because of the spot. Pittsburgh now finally showing some vulnerability. They barely beat Dallas. I think there's bettors definitely reacting to that. Cincinnati certainly in a plus spot here off a bye week, and backdoor Burrow is a real thing here this season in the NFL. This guy is a dangerous quarterback to be betting against in a price range like this where he's getting a touchdown or more. He just doesn't quit in games. He wants to keep moving the offense and scoring points late, even with his team way behind, and he's getting better by the week. I'll be honest, I'll give Joe Burrow credit because he's got a terrible offensive line. The fact that he's played as well as he has with a terrible offensive line, with a defense that can't consistently get stops, I give him credit because how good could this guy be when he's finally got an offensive line capable of pass protecting, when he's got a little bit more skill position talent, when he's got a defense that can occasionally get a 3-and-out or two, which this current Cincinnati defense can't do. What's going to happen with the Bengals when they have all those pieces in play? Then they're going to become a really, really interesting team and a better team at that point. We know with Pittsburgh, there's a whole lot of situations up in the air here. Is Ben Roethlisberger going to play? He came in contact with one of his teammates who has COVID-19, part of the COVID-19 situation with this team, which includes Vance McDonald, Jalen Samuels, Ben Roethlisberger, depth players, though. So Ben's the big one, really, because Vance McDonald is a depth tight end. He doesn't see the field very much. Eric Ebron is their starting tight end. So you got to be careful. That's why you got to know who is exactly dealing with this situation, who's on the COVID reserve list. And really, Big Ben is the one and only big name and key starter dealing with this right now for the Steelers. So we'll have to wait and see if he's able to go. I took Cincinnati early in the week or earlier this week. I think I got 8.5. It's down to 7.5. There's still an 8 at bookmaker/Chris if in terms of the number that was posted, although a lot of these books have brought that number down or taken the game down off the board because of the Pittsburgh situation. For me, I'm still only going to look towards Cincinnati. You worry that Pittsburgh, they got this game and they got Jacksonville in their next 2 games before they play Baltimore again. And with, the COVID situation for Tomlin, this just might be, let's get the win and go home. We don't necessarily need to win by a big margin. Cincinnati's been good in this bigger underdog price range. They're off a bye, so it's a good spot as well for Cincinnati. The one concern I've got is I've got just these little figments of memory in my mind thinking of this game of Cincinnati playing Baltimore a few weeks ago. And their offensive line against one of the better defensive fronts they've played this season was hideous. I mean, they basically allowed Baltimore's defense free reign on Joe Burrow to treat Burrow like a human whoopee cushion in that game. Like he was just on his keister constantly. And Pittsburgh's defense, especially the front, Cameron Hayward and company, they are every bit as good as Baltimore's. And if that offensive line is not prepared for what Pittsburgh's going to offer up front from a pass rush standpoint, Burrow's going to be in for a rough day. He's going to get hit. He's going to get sacked a bunch of times. He could fumble a bit, which happened in that Baltimore game. That's the issue. And that worries me because the game can quickly get away from Cincinnati if the offensive line is as porous against a defensive front that's every bit as good as the defensive front they had a problem with just a few weeks ago against Baltimore. But still, the spot makes sense for Cincinnati. Pittsburgh's got the COVID issues, especially with Ben. And if he doesn't play, let's just do the hypothetical. If he doesn't play, Mason Rudolph, Josh Dobbs, I don't really trust that. Mason Rudolph, I thought, would be a capable starting quarterback, and I gave him the opportunity because he was very good at Oklahoma State. He just didn't do it consistently for me, so I wouldn't trust them here, even against the Bengals defense if either of them start for Ben. So for me, it's still a lean towards Cincinnati, but again, the number's not quite as good as it was earlier in the week. Seattle, LA Rams. We've got the LA Rams 1.5, 2-point home favorites, 54.5 the total in this game. Here's the Seattle Seahawks numbers off a straight-up loss in the last 10 years under Pete Carroll, 30-14 against the spread. Seattle Seahawks off a straight-up loss, 30-14 against the spread in the last 10 years. Now, a 10-year sample size of ATS numbers, I usually say, who the hell cares? Different players, different coaches, different schemes, different systems. The numbers don't matter when you're talking 10-year sample size with one team, ATS, in terms of a trend like this. But these are all Pete Carroll ATS stats. These are all Pete Carroll ATS numbers, that they're 30-14 ATS off a loss since 2010. And obviously that's the situation here for Seattle, coming off the loss to the Buffalo Bills last week. But let's put that game in context. Seattle played San Francisco and Arizona in their two previous games before flying to the East Coast to play Buffalo last week. Two division games. They play the Bills on the road. Doesn't excuse them. They played bad. The secondary was hideous. I mean, Buffalo just threw the ball constantly because, the secondary wasn't stopping it. That was a horrible game for the Seattle pass defense, but they had the two division games before playing Buffalo. And after the Buffalo game, they've got this game against the Rams, another division game, and they've got Arizona, which is going to be a revenge game for Seattle after they lost to Arizona in overtime a few weeks ago on that Sunday night game, which was a thriller. So you're talking about Buffalo being a game sandwiched in between 4 consecutive divisional games. I'm not saying they look past Buffalo, but again, you're playing these big division opponents and these bigger games on your schedule because it's in the division, in the conference, and then you play Buffalo, you're making that travel out to the East, and it was just Seattle didn't have it that day. Not to take anything away from Buffalo. They played great on offense, flawless game. Russell Wilson was about as bad as I've seen Russell Wilson play in a game, forcing the football into coverage, turning the ball over multiple times. And when I get bad Russell Wilson in a game, I'm almost always interested in thinking we're going to get good Russell Wilson the next game. That guy doesn't stink up the joint 2 games in a row very often. And I think we're going to see him and the Seahawks offense play a lot better here in this game. Here's the thing with the LA Rams. They are in a good spot here. They're off the bye. That's going to help the LA Rams. There's no question. And Sean McVay, usually with extra time to prepare, that's a coach I want to be backing off a bye. No question. I still have question marks about how good the Rams are. I do. I honestly do. I know their record says 5-3, pretty solid. Let's recap the victories this season for the LA Rams, shall we? Win number 1, Dallas. Win number 2, Philadelphia. Injury-riddled Eagles team at that time in week 2. New York Giants, win number 3. Washington football team, win number 4. Chicago Bears, win number 5. Bears were really the Bears in terms of teams, beating teams with a winning record. Chicago's the only team they've beaten with a winning record. And Chicago's probably one of the weakest teams in the NFL in terms of teams that currently have a winning record. So how truly amazing is this LA Rams team? I guess we're going to find that out here this week against Seattle because, and you look at offenses they've played. How good is the Rams defense specifically? Dallas, Philly, Giants, Washington, San Francisco. And you remember the 49ers, I believe when they played San Francisco, I think that was Jimmy Garoppolo that night, 24-16 that game. I'm trying to remember the Sunday night game. But yeah, they didn't win it. Yeah, it was Jimmy G that night. They lost that game 24-16. Nick Foles, and then they played Miami last week, or before their bye week, I should say, 2 weeks ago, and they lost 28-17. Where's the great offenses? Where's the great quarterback play to truly test this LA Rams defense in the previous games that they've played this season? Where the hell is it? I don't necessarily see it. I'm on Seattle here. I think it's a very good bounce back spot. I know they were on the East Coast last week. Now they're flying back to the West. Not ideal. Whereas the Rams are off the bye. They're rested. They're ready. I just don't know how good the Rams are. And Seattle, to me, off the loss is always worth a look. Let's not forget, we already have evidence this year. They lost their first game of the season against Arizona in overtime. And they bounced back following that and beat the 49ers and pretty much ran away with the game in the second half, 37-27 a couple weeks ago. And when it comes to Russell Wilson, in terms of trusting him to play better off a bad showing, I trust him. As simple as that. 30-14 ATS last 10 years after a straight-up loss for Seattle. That's the proof you need. You usually are in a bet-on spot with the Seahawks and Russell Wilson off a bad game. So I like Seattle here. You can get +1.5 to +2 on the Seattle side here. The total is 54.5. Seattle, I'm not betting under, but the Rams have been an under-trending team. This is a clash of totals streaks in this game. Seattle's gone over the total 6-2 this season. The Rams are 6-2 to the under, though, this season, and 5 straight games for the LA Rams have gone under the total. So that's why I'm not in love with the total this week. I'm just going to go with Seattle here. I do think there's some onus on them to shore up the secondary. And they to me, should be able to at least a little bit more. I don't think the Rams are an amazing passing attack. They have to rely on running the football a lot. And I'll say this about Seattle's defense, which is very, very shaky still. The secondary, to me, is still a big problem. But they have been better against the run the last few weeks. There's a reason why Buffalo didn't bother running the football, because that was the strength of Seattle's defense last week, was against the run. They just shredded them through the air, and because they knew they could, and because they knew Seattle was stronger against the run. The Rams have to be able to run the football to some degree of success to keep Goff in good situations offensively. They may not be able to as effectively run the football here against Seattle because the run defense for the Seahawks has been better lately. I like Seattle here. I think they win bounce back mode, which has been a great role for them over the years. Speaking of San Francisco, they're taking on New Orleans. New Orleans 6.5-point home favorites in the Superdome, up to 9-point home favorites, 48.5 to 49 the total in this game. The Niners are not a team I want to back right now, but everybody seems to be on to the injury situation. It's just a mess for the 49ers. I talked about it last week on this show prior to them facing Green Bay, and they were just blown out. They just don't have the artillery right now. George Kittle out. Kendrick Bourne, River Craycraft now, who actually stepped up, played well for the Niners a little bit last week. He's now questionable. Trent Taylor questionable. The good news is it looks like Brandon Ayuk is the one guy is going to come back that's going to be able to play and return from injury to support Richie James, who's basically the only quality, capable receiver left standing for this injury-riddled 49ers offense. So that's some good news there. But Nick Mullins is still, he's a game-to-game head-scratcher for me because he's had some games where he's looked very, very capable, very, very good at times, and then he's had some games where he's been awful. And now we're starting to see more and more, the last couple games of the bad Nick Mullins. And that's not the Nick Mullins I want to trust against a New Orleans defense here, playing on the road against a defense that finally got their swagger back last week, totally throttling Tom Brady and the Buccaneers offense last week. New Orleans defense has been an issue for me all year. Last week was not even close to not even close that was their best game of the season. Pass rush was there. Finally, they got pressure on an opposing quarterback, which they've lacked at times, and the secondary. And Marshawn Lattimore's had a tough year, and that secondary at times, which has been giving up big plays. Finally, they showed up, that pass defense, and with all the injuries for San Francisco on offense and going to Mullins at quarterback, yeah, I worry. And if this New Orleans offense plays anywhere close to as good as they did last week, because let's be honest, that was the first time in weeks the Saints offense has been finally had all hands on deck. Drew Brees, Kamara, Michael Thomas, Sanders, Traquan Smith, Callaway, they had everybody at their disposal pretty much. And it looked like it last week against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. That offense looked healthy, looked great. And even though he didn't really do a whole lot last week, Michael Thomas in his return against the Bucs, just having him on the field, you've got to divert defensive attention to him. You have to, with just the great chemistry and cohesion Brees and him have had over the years. And it makes it more challenging for the defense to defend the Saints offense. So yeah, the money's come in on New Orleans. I understand why. Now it's 9. I don't know if I'm going to rush to bet it at 9, but I'm not going to be on San Francisco. Not in their current state. No way, no how. Maybe an under in this game. And 49 now the total. I could see it maybe staying under. I think New Orleans, even if they get to 31, 35. Remember, this is a methodical offense. They methodically drive the ball down the field. It's not really a huge, big play, big pass offense to what it was in years past. Methodically move the ball. Even if they get to 31 or 28, 31 in this game, can you trust San Francisco to hit 20, 21 to get the game over the total? I'm not so sure. So the under has taken money, and this is one under where that I would agree with, and I could see it being a lower scoring game. All right, Sunday Night Football and Monday Night Football to wrap up the show. Baltimore, New England, Sunday Night Football. We've got the Ravens, 7-point road favorites in Foxborough, 43.5 the total in this game. New England, obviously, everybody saw it last week that they were life and death to beat the winless New York Jets. Obviously, a terrible performance by the Patriots, even in a victory last Monday night against the Jets. Cam Newton, though, they needed him to play well down the stretch, and he did. And actually he did it through the air. And throwing the football at times for Cam Newton in this offense has been a problem. And there's been tons of problems for the Patriots because they've had O-line injuries most of the season. Their skill position talent group at wide receiver is nothing at all to write home about. I mean, you're talking about the likes of Damiere Byrd and Jacoby Myers having to carry this team at wide receiver. Although Jacoby Myers looks like they might have something in him. He was really good last week, and he's been good for a couple of weeks now. At receiver for the Patriots. So it looks like maybe they found someone at receiver that they can trust for Cam Newton. But still, what happened to the defense? The defense was really the unit the Patriots have been relying on this year while their offense has had all these issues. And Joe Flacco, there's no pass rush. A guy can't move in the pocket, Joe Flacco. And yet there was a non-existent pass rush all night long for the Patriots against the Jets on Monday Night Football. So that looks like is that a one-off? Is that an anomaly? Because they're supposed to be able to get pressure on Joe Flacco at this stage of his career. They couldn't do it. They finally did it, actually, with the game on the line. That big sack, which forced the 3rd and long with 2 minutes or so left in the game, and forced the Jets to punt, which inevitably gave the Patriots the ball back with the chance to kick that Nick Folk game-winning field goal, which they did. But other than that, the pass rush was sorely lacking in that game. Baltimore laying 7 on the road in this game. Baltimore is a methodical, grind it out, run the football heavily type of team. And New England got shredded through the air. That's where their defensive issues were last week against the Jets. Can Baltimore do that? Can Lamar Jackson do that consistently through the air? Let's not forget, last week, even in the win against the Colts, was really keeping the ball on the ground, keeping that run game involved, is what allowed the Ravens to win that game. And New England is better, in my opinion, against the run than they are against the pass. So it's not the worst matchup for this New England defense, but there's just a lot of question marks for New England. What defense am I going to get? The defense that's been solid at times this season, or the defense that got ripped apart by Joe Flacco on Monday night? And what New England offense am I going to get? The Cam Newton that's fumbled, that's, been inaccurate, that's had trouble, finding receivers down the field or getting receivers to step up for him to make plays? Or is it going to be the New England offense where I actually saw some semblance of a competent, effective, productive passing game last week against the Jets? And yet, while we say that they were finally effective and productive, we also have to remember that was the Jets that they were playing on the defensive side of the football. So there's questions, and it's definitely not the greatest of scheduling spots for Baltimore. I mean, New England, usually you get fired up. Maybe they still are, but I don't know if I'd want to lay 7. Here's what I am going to do. I'm definitely going to put Baltimore in some kind of teaser this week. There's a few teaser candidates that stick out. Baltimore's one. And in fact, you know what? I'm going to give you a 2-team teaser because I know I'll be on this teaser for sure. Baltimore's going to be one leg of that teaser. And I already have another game in mind, and it's actually the Monday night game. We're going to talk about it in just a second to wrap up the show. That's the other game I would definitely consider a teaser on. Baltimore's one leg of the 2-team 6-point teaser. That's the way I would go. I think Baltimore does win this game. I would be absolutely stunned if they don't win this game. But I don't know if I want to lay a full 7 on the road in this given spot. I also lean to the under. I'm surprised this number's continuing to drift up. It was 40.5. It's up to 43.5, 44. Let's not forget, Baltimore's a run-heavy team. Baltimore does have a very good defense, which was bolstered with Ngakoue, getting him recently to bolster that pass rush. Look, New England lit it up, and their defense was bad last week. I think their defense will be a little bit better at home this week, and I don't think Cam Newton and the Patriots offense is scoring 30 like they did last week against the Jets. So I don't agree fully with the total going up in this game. I do think it's got a chance to stay under the total here now at 43.5, even a 44 right now at Pinnacle. Maybe no hurry to bet this under, but this is definitely one where I think it goes lower than the projected total. All right, the final game. We've reached the end of the card. Monday Night Football, Minnesota Vikings, Chicago Bears. Minnesota 2.5-point road favorites, 43 the total, 43.5. Chicago opened a 1.5-point home favorite, and now Minnesota a 2.5-point road favorite. So we have seen a big adjustment here in this game. Chicago's got its flaws, no question. Offensive line's been not very good this year. Nick Foles has been not below average. The offense has problems. I don't think their play calling's been great. I don't think that their scheming has been great. But the one thing that has been pretty good for Chicago this season, and it's why they've won the games they've won, it's been their defense. No question for the Chicago Bears. Now, they have lost 3 games in a row. LA Rams, New Orleans, Tennessee, they're all very good teams. But their defense, hung in there against Tennessee, hung in there against New Orleans, hung in there against the Rams, but they just didn't get enough from the Bears offense. And I understand. I mean, you got to like Minnesota's offense more than Chicago's, and maybe that's what the betting markets are seeing here in making the adjustment that they've made with the flip of favorites here. Now, Chicago opened a favorite in this game. Now, Minnesota laying points on the road. But to me, Chicago's got the much better defense here, and they're at home, and we can't totally look past the fact that, at times this, especially here at Soldier Field, the Bears defense, let's not forget, they beat Tom Brady and the Buccaneers on this field earlier this season. One of the better defensive performances of the season here for the Chicago Bears. Look, Minnesota, I understand they beat Green Bay a couple weeks ago. They thrashed Detroit last week, 2 wins in a row. Signs of life. A pulse for a team that's really had a disappointing season. They've now gone from 1-5 to 3-5 after the last 2 wins. I understand all that. But now they're laying points on the road here. And with Kirk Cousins against this defense on the road in an outdoor cold environment, I don't know about that. And for me, Minnesota's got to run the football with Dalvin Cook to be successful. It's simple as that. Kirk Cousins isn't doing anything exclusively to lead this offense to a victory through the air. It's got to be running the football, and that's not going to be easy against Chicago. Chicago's only given up 4 yards per carry on the season, one of the better run defenses in the NFL with that strong defensive front. that they've got Akeem Hicks and company can stop the run. And if they can do that, and they've shown the ability to do that, Chicago, it's not an easy team to run against. You can make Kirk Cousins more of a one-dimensional offense, and that to me is going to be a problem for Minnesota in this game. I'm a little bit now perplexed the line has moved this much. I will be on Chicago for sure if it gets to +3 in this game. I'm not buying Minnesota laying a field goal on the road. No way. No way in this game with what I've seen. And Chicago, actually, believe it or not, in recent head-to-head meetings against the Vikings, they've done quite well. I mean, you look at recent games here for Chicago against Minnesota head-to-head. Chicago has won each of the last 4 meetings against the Minnesota Vikings. 4-0 straight up, 3-1 against the spread in the last 4 head-to-head meetings against the Minnesota Vikings. This has been a good matchup for the Bears. Their defense has gotten after Kirk Cousins in this Vikings offense, and they've at least neutralized the Vikings ground game. Divisional dogs this season, by the way, 29-16 ATS this season. Keep that in mind. Divisional dogs, 29-16 ATS this season. I already mentioned liking Seattle as an underdog against the Rams earlier. Very, very good trend. Chicago to me is the way I would look here in this game. I will be on them if it gets to +3. I will definitely already right now be on them as the second part of that 2-team 6-point teaser that I mentioned. Tease down Baltimore to -1 on Sunday Night Football, and you can tease Chicago up to +8.5 now. That's a really good teaser number on Chicago, in my opinion, +8.5. You're going to tell me Minnesota's going on the road against a very good defense with Kirk Cousins and winning by more than a touchdown in this game? I can't see that happening. So I like Chicago in a teaser, and I'll bet Chicago straight bet on Chicago if I can get +3 before kickoff, and it's definitely looking like it could move in that direction before Monday night. So I like the Bears here. It wouldn't surprise me if they win, but definitely liking that teaser option with Baltimore and Chicago. Baltimore down to -1, Chicago up to +8.5. I think that's a good 2-team teaser option. All right, there we go. We've gotten through the card. That's going to wrap up the show. Ian Cameron's Football Frenzy, another edition in the books for Thursday, November 12th, the Week 10 edition of the National Football League. Thanks to everyone in the chat for joining us. Pie Guy, Justin, Jansen, the Czar, teasers, question mark from the Czar. Teasers have to make sense in terms of, and, I learned this from Teddy Covers a long time ago, and he's absolutely right when it comes to teasers. You want teasers that can get the favorite below a field goal, and you want teasers where you can get the underdog above a touchdown. Those favorites of 1, 1.5, 2, 2.5. You want to get those to above it, those favorites of 7, 7.5, 8, 8.5. You want to get those favorites down below a field goal on a teaser, and the underdogs that are, and then the underdogs that are, 1.5, 2, 2.5 point underdogs. You want to get them up above a touchdown. So those are the teasers that make sense. The ones that don't make sense, I see friends of mine, and I'm embarrassed for them. And I have told them many, many times, why are you betting that kind of teaser? I'm seeing them tease a team from +6.5 to +12.5, an underdog. Like, are you kidding me? Like, that's not a positive expectation plus EV teaser strategy. It's not. The teaser strategies that make sense are the 1, 1.5, 2, 2.5 point underdogs. You raise the underdog to above a touchdown. The other one is the favorites of 7, 7.5, 8, 8.5, and you get them below -3. Those are the teasers that it's positive expectation. It's a sensible strategy because you're knocking out all the key numbers. You get a slight dog, 1, 1.5, 2.5, teased up on a 6-point teaser. You get past the 3 key number. You get past the 6 key number. You get past the 7 key number. It's a great teaser option. Same with the favorites of 7, 7.5, 8, 8.5. You get the favorite below 7, below 6, below 4, below 3. You knock out like 3 or 4 key numbers on a teaser doing it that way. What the hell are you knocking out with 6.5 to 12.5 on a dog on a teaser? 7 and 10, two key numbers. That's it. Whereas the other point spread ranges that I mentioned, You get 4 key numbers knocked out of the park with a teaser bet. That's the difference. That's why this, people that are, let's tease this team from 6.5 up to 12.5. That's just, you're only getting 2 key numbers on that. You do it with the favorites of 7-9 or the favorites of 7-9 down below a field goal. That's 4 key numbers that you go through that are included as part of that teaser bet. And the same thing goes with the underdogs of 1, 1.5, 2, 2.5. That's 4 key numbers, 3, 4, 6, 7. That's why those teasers in those point spread situations for dogs and for favorites, that's why they make sense. And that's why they're the only teaser bets that I will make when it comes to the NFL. So that's just a little explanation of what makes the most sense, at least in my opinion, when it comes to teasers. But that'll wrap it up. Thank you to everyone for tuning in. It's been a great show. I appreciate that. Yeah, there you go. Titans plus 7.5. Seahawks. And you can tease them down or tease them up as well to 7.5. Yeah, there you go. If you like the Titans now, you can get plus 7 or plus 7.5, and you can get the Seahawks plus 7.5, says Ryan Dow in the chat, who's been a longtime follower of mine. I believe he's a subscriber of mine still as well. So Ryan, thank you. Great point. That's the teaser you want. That's the type of teaser or 2-team teasers you want to be betting to get those key numbers. And get those, knock it out through 4 key numbers. That is definitely what you're looking for when it comes to your 2-team 6-point teasers. That's the strategy that I like using the most. All right, great show. Thank you again to everyone for tuning in. We're here every Thursday, 1:00 p.m. Eastern with Ian Cameron's Football Frenzy right here on the Pub Sports Radio YouTube channel. A reminder, we've got Saturday college football closing time show, 11 a.m. Eastern, 8 a.m. Pacific, me and Connor Mack getting you ready for college football on Saturday. And then we're on Sunday as well, the NFL closing time show, noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific, me, Connor Mack, and Ski Profit getting you ready for the NFL Week 10 slate. The Ian Cameron Sports Report, make sure you're watching that as well daily here on the Pub Sports Radio YouTube channel, Monday to Friday. I'll be recording that in just a little bit, today's edition of the show. Thanks to everyone for tuning in. It's been another fun show. This is like therapy for me, talking about every single NFL game. It fleshes out my thoughts. I get them out in the open, and I feel more confident and better about my opinions going into the NFL card after doing this show. So thanks to everyone for tuning in. I appreciate it. Enjoy the weekend ahead. Good luck with all of your plays in the NFL and college football as well. And I'll see you again right here next Thursday, 1:00 p.m. Eastern, for another edition of Ian Cameron's Football Frenzy, right here on Pub Sports Radio.